Altitude is the #1 reason why people fail or struggle on Mount Kilimanjaro. If you're a reasonably fit hiker, the hike itself should be doable. However, where people get caught up is dealing with the altitude. They're not properly trained and don't understand how to prepare for altitude. In this video, I'm going to walk you through exactly how I handled the altitude and what I did to prepare leading up to the hike, so that when you get out there, you can stack the odds in your favor to have a really good experience. People talk about the response to altitude like it's completely random, and honestly, I thought that for a really long time. Back in 2019, I did a bunch of hiking in Peru and I was completely unprepared for it. And for a long time afterwards, that's exactly what I thought. But my experience doing Kilimanjaro taught me differently. How you respond to the altitude is going to be heavily influenced by your preparedness, your pacing, and the decisions you make long before summit night. So we're going to go over the 4 pillars that I think are key to being successful on Mount Kilimanjaro when it comes to altitude. And the last one is probably the most important. So the first pillar is going to be having a big cardiovascular base. So having a big aerobic base, which means that kind of low intensity cardio, makes a big difference. But more importantly than that, I've seen lots of people with a big aerobic base, but what they don't have necessarily is breathing efficiency and respiratory efficiency. And how we actually build this up is through breath work. There's 2 main things that we need to consider when we're talking about breath work. The first one is just getting down the breathing basics and getting efficient. And the second piece is building up your CO2 tolerance so that you can handle the altitude better. So while having a big aerobic base is definitely important, I think what people miss quite often is having the efficiency, and that happens with breath work, which I've proven with myself and many clients that doing that breath work is crucial for high altitude hiking. The second pillar is really quite obvious, and that would be to pick a longer route. Something like the Lemosho 8-day route is what I did and what I suggest most people do. And if you look at the success rate on each route, you'll notice that the longer the route, the higher the success rate. The way I viewed this was that if you're flying all the way to Africa, doing all of the training, don't short yourself by trying to do it in 5 days. Enjoy the trip and significantly increase the odds of you being successful in a summit attempt. The reason why this is so important is as you sleep and as you go through those days at that higher altitude, your body's adapting to the decreased level of oxygen that's available, so that when you get to that last camp and you have to make your big push up, which is the relatively big jump in altitude, your body's going to be much more prepared for it than if you do a shorter route and don't give yourself time to acclimate along the way. So you really want to look at choosing a longer route as not a weakness, but a winning strategy to get you to the top in good shape with less risk. The third pillar is really just a short amount of research before you head out for the trip so that you understand the symptoms of altitude sickness, so that as you start to feel these, you are aware of it and you know that, hey, maybe I need to slow down, adjust my Diamox medication, or if it's severe, you know to let your guides know so that the right decisions can be made. For myself and the group that I went with, I found that the combination of pillar 3 and pillar 4, which we're going to talk about next, to be the most important 2 when you got to the mountain and you were actually starting to experience the effects of altitude. By knowing what those symptoms are, it allows you to go from what the regular dosage is and decide when you might need to take more, so that you can stay ahead of symptoms instead of behind and chasing, which is not where you want to be. Which takes us to pillar number 4, which is obviously going to be Diamox. Now, as you guys know, this is not medical advice. You should definitely go talk to a doctor, get a prescription, and follow what the doctor and your guides out on the mountain are telling you. With that being said, we are going to go over some of the basics and what worked best for me. So the typical dosage is to be at 125 milligrams unless you're starting to actually feel more severe effects of altitude sickness, or you're seeing your O2 sats dropping. And then in that case, what typically happens is that you go up to 250 milligrams until your symptoms and your O2 sats start to improve. Now, what I did for myself was took that 125 milligram dosage throughout the duration of the hike. But there's 2 specific days on that 8-day Lemosho route that we see relatively big jumps in our altitude. So before each of those, I bumped that dose temporarily to 250 And that helped me a ton on the hike to not experience heavy symptoms and keep things relatively mild and my body adapting. Well, like I said, taking the 8-day route, taking your time and going in with as efficient of lungs as possible and a big aerobic base was definitely the key to success. And again, like I said, this is what I did and it's not necessarily what you should do. So educate yourself a little bit about the effects and the proper dosaging and usage of Diamox. And I suggest you also rely on the expertise of your guides. They've done this a ton, they've seen this a ton, and they know what they're talking about. Never hide your symptoms from them. I actually spent some time talking to my guide about this very problem, that people hide things because they don't want to show weakness or feel like they're not going to get a summit attempt. But what really ends up happening is these people get behind the 8 ball and don't start taking the medication early enough. One final little tip that I will give you guys for your peace of mind, for me anyways, was bringing a little O2 sat monitor with me so that I could monitor myself outside of the couple of times each day that the guides were checking in on me. And this is a really good tool to have anyways if you're going to be doing some breath work ahead of time to prepare for the mountains by simulating that high altitude with breath work. If you're interested in a training and breathwork program for Kilimanjaro, I'll put a link in the description where you can book a call and we can talk about where you're currently at, when you plan to do Kilimanjaro, so that we can build a plan depending on where your training experience is at and how much time you have to get prepared. So my final thoughts on climbing Mount Kilimanjaro and managing altitude really comes down to preparation ahead of time, picking smart routes, and understanding the symptoms of altitude sickness and where you should be using Diamox. If you have any questions about hiking Mount Kilimanjaro, specifically around altitude, drop them into the comments and I'll be happy to answer them. And I wish you guys the best of luck out there.